In the pre-dawn hours of March 23rd, a flotilla of American warships slipped through the Bashi Channel and entered the South China Sea. But this was no ordinary patrol. Embedded within that carrier strike group was something Beijing has spent 2 decades preparing to counter, something Chinese military planners had convinced themselves would never be deployed this close to their shores. Within 72 hours, Beijing had scrambled 47 aircraft, repositioned 3 submarine squadrons, and issued diplomatic protests to 17 nations. The question every defense analyst is now asking is simple. What exactly did the United States just park in China's backyard, and why is the response so unprecedented? Welcome back to States News, your source for strategic analysis that cuts through the noise of modern great power competition. If you've been following our coverage of Indo-Pacific developments, you know we don't deal in speculation or sensationalism. We deal in facts, context, and the kind of deep analysis that helps you understand not just what's happening, but why it matters. If that's the content you're looking for, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell, because the situation in the South China Sea is evolving rapidly. Here's what we're going to unpack in the next 20 minutes. The United States has forward deployed its newest and most sophisticated sea-based integrated air defense system directly into contested waters, pairing it with offensive capabilities that fundamentally alter the balance of power in the region. This isn't simply about one ship or one weapon system. This is about a strategic posture shift that Beijing has been dreading since the early 2000s. For years, Chinese military doctrine has centered on what they call anti-access area denial, a strategy built around the assumption that American carrier groups are fundamentally vulnerable to massed missile attacks. The People's Liberation Army has invested hundreds of billions of dollars into systems designed to keep American ships hundreds of miles from Chinese shores. And now, the United States has essentially called that bluff. We're going to examine exactly what was deployed, why the timing matters, what capabilities these systems actually possess versus what propaganda claims, and most importantly, what this deployment signals about Washington's evolving strategy toward Beijing. By the end of this analysis, you'll understand why Chinese state media has been conspicuously quiet about the details, while simultaneously ramping up nationalist rhetoric to levels we haven't seen since the Taiwan Strait crisis of 2024. To understand why this deployment matters, we need to step back and examine the broader strategic context of the South China Sea. This body of water, roughly 1.4 million square miles in total area, represents one of the most consequential pieces of maritime real estate on the planet. Approximately 1/3 of all global shipping transits these waters annually, representing over $5.3 trillion in trade. For China specifically, roughly 80% of its oil imports pass through these sea lanes, making control of the South China Sea an existential economic concern for Beijing. Since 2012, China has pursued an aggressive island-building campaign, transforming submerged reefs and rocky outcroppings into militarized artificial islands. The 7 features in the Spratly chain that China has developed now host airstrips capable of handling military aircraft, surface-to-air missile batteries, anti-ship cruise missiles, and sophisticated radar installations. Fiery Cross Reef alone features a runway stretching nearly 10,000 feet, hardened aircraft shelters, and what satellite imagery suggests are facilities for signals intelligence collection. Mischief Reef, Subi Reef, and others host similar capabilities. Collectively, these installations represent what American military planners have termed an unsinkable aircraft carrier, extending Chinese power projection hundreds of miles beyond its recognized territorial waters. The strategic logic from Beijing's perspective is straightforward. By establishing de facto control over the South China Sea through physical presence and military capability, China creates what strategists call a fait accompli, a situation where the cost of reversing Chinese gains exceeds the benefits any challenger might achieve. For nearly a decade, this strategy has largely succeeded. Despite freedom of navigation operations conducted by the United States and allied navies, the military balance has steadily shifted in China's favor within the first and second island chains. The People's Liberation Army Navy has transformed from a coastal defense force into a blue water-capable fleet. China now operates 2 aircraft carriers, with a third undergoing sea trials and at least 2 more under construction. Its submarine fleet includes 12 nuclear-powered attack submarines and 6 ballistic missile submarines, with newer and quieter designs entering service annually. The surface fleet has expanded to include over 50 modern destroyers and frigates, many equipped with the HHQ-9 surface-to-air missile system and the YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missile. Perhaps more significantly, China has deployed the DF-21D and DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missiles, weapons specifically designed to target aircraft carriers at ranges exceeding 1,000 miles. This is the strategic environment into which the United States just introduced a game-changing capability. The deployment in question centers on the USS Mobile Bay, an upgraded Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser that has undergone what the Navy terms Baseline 9C modernization. But the ship itself isn't what's making Beijing nervous. It's what the Mobile Bay is carrying, and what it's networked to, that represents the strategic shift. The vessel now serves as the command node for an integrated air and missile defense capability that pairs the latest version of the Aegis combat system with the SM-6 Block IA missile, and crucially, the first operationally deployed cooperative engagement capability with full cross-platform targeting integration. Let me explain why this combination matters. The SM-6 missile represents a generational leap in American naval air defense. Unlike previous interceptors designed purely for defensive purposes, the SM-6 is a dual-role weapon capable of both shooting down incoming missiles and aircraft and attacking enemy surface ships at ranges exceeding 250 nautical miles. It can receive targeting data in flight from any sensor in the network, not just the ship that launched it. This means an SM-6 fired from the Mobile Bay can be guided to its target by an F-35 Lightning II flying 300 miles away, or by an E-2D Advanced Hawkeye providing airborne early warning, or by another ship entirely. This capability, called Naval Integrated Fire Control Counter-Air, fundamentally changes the calculus of any engagement. Previously, each ship in a carrier group was largely limited to engaging threats it could detect with its own sensors. The horizon imposed hard limits on targeting range for low-flying threats like anti-ship cruise missiles. An Aegis destroyer might have missiles capable of reaching 150 miles, but if its radar could only see a sea-skimming missile at 20 miles, that extended range was largely theoretical against the most dangerous threats. Naval Integrated Fire Control Counter-Air erases that limitation. Now, an F-35 flying at 40,000 feet with its APG-81 radar can detect a sea-skimming missile at ranges exceeding 200 miles and instantly transmit that targeting data to every Aegis-equipped ship in the network. The geometry of naval combat has fundamentally shifted from a series of isolated ship versus threat engagements to a unified battle space where any sensor can guide any shooter. But here's what makes this deployment particularly significant. The Mobile Bay isn't operating alone. Satellite imagery and ship tracking data indicate the presence of at least 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers operating in concert, all of which have received similar upgrades. The carrier USS Ronald Reagan is operating in a central position, its air wing providing the aerial sensor coverage that transforms the entire group into a single integrated weapon system. Additionally, there are credible reports that the deployment includes at least one Virginia-class attack submarine equipped with the new Block 5 payload module, capable of carrying up to 40 Tomahawk cruise missiles, or a combination of Tomahawks and the developmental hypersonic conventional prompt strike weapon. This represents the most capable naval formation the United States has placed in the South China Sea since at least 2001, and potentially ever. The combined missile loadout of this formation exceeds 600 vertical launch cells, representing a potential salvo of anti-air, anti-ship, and land attack weapons that would be extraordinarily difficult for any adversary to counter. The timing of this deployment is equally significant. It arrives amid escalating tensions over Taiwan, deteriorating diplomatic relations following the collapse of climate cooperation talks in February, and crucially, just weeks before planned joint military exercises between China and Russia in the East China Sea. The message from Washington appears unmistakable. Despite Chinese investment in anti-access capabilities, the United States retains the capacity and the will to operate powerful naval forces within what Beijing considers its sphere of influence. Chinese reaction to this deployment has been notably inconsistent, suggesting genuine internal debate about how to respond. State media initially downplayed the deployment, with Global Times publishing a commentary dismissing American naval power as obsolete in the missile age. Within 48 hours, that narrative shifted to aggressive condemnation, with Foreign Ministry spokesmen calling the deployment a dangerous provocation that undermines regional peace and stability. The People's Liberation Army Eastern Theater Command announced combat readiness patrols in response, releasing video footage of J-16 fighter jets conducting long-range maritime strike training. But the most telling indicator of Beijing's concern came from what didn't happen. Despite the proximity of the American formation to Chinese-controlled features in the Spratlys, the PLA did not conduct any direct harassment or shadowing operations for the first 72 hours, a stark departure from standard practice during previous freedom of navigation operations. This restraint suggests one of two possibilities. Either Chinese military commanders are under strict orders to avoid any incident that might escalate during a period of domestic political sensitivity, or, more concerning from Beijing's perspective, their assessment of the tactical situation counseled caution. Several defense analysts, including Toshi Yoshihara at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, have suggested that this restraint indicates Chinese recognition that their existing anti-ship capabilities may not be as effective against this particular formation as their doctrine assumes. The networked air defense capability significantly complicates any saturation attack scenario, and the presence of F-35s provides an intelligence and targeting advantage China cannot currently match. Let's examine what this deployment reveals about the evolving competition between American and Chinese military capabilities. For years, a dominant narrative in defense circles held that China had achieved what some termed local superiority in the Western Pacific. This assessment was based on geographic proximity, which allows China to concentrate forces the United States must project across thousands of miles. Mass, meaning the sheer number of missiles China could bring to bear against a carrier group, and uncertainty about American defensive capabilities against the latest Chinese anti-ship ballistic missiles. This deployment challenges each of those assumptions in important ways. On the question of geographic proximity, the presence of a highly capable naval formation operating continuously within the South China Sea demonstrates that the United States can sustain significant combat power in contested waters despite distance. The logistics train supporting this deployment includes at least 2 fleet replenishment oilers and a submarine tender operating from rotating positions, indicating Washington's commitment to extended presence rather than brief transits. Regarding mass, the networked defensive capability changes the mathematics of saturation attacks. Previously, analysts calculated that overwhelming a carrier group's defenses might require salvos of 200 or more missiles, launched in coordinated waves to exhaust defensive interceptor magazines. With naval integrated fire control counter-air, each ship in the formation can engage threats detected by any sensor in the network, effectively multiplying the defensive capacity. The total interceptor count available to this formation may exceed 400 missiles, and the ability to engage at extended ranges means each interceptor potentially gets multiple engagement opportunities against a single incoming threat. The third assumption, uncertainty about American capabilities against anti-ship ballistic missiles, remains partially valid but increasingly contested. The SM-3 Block 2A missile, also deployed on ships in this formation, was specifically designed for ballistic missile defense. While its precise capabilities against the DF-21D and DF-26 remain classified, successful tests against intermediate-range ballistic missile targets suggest meaningful capability. More importantly, the layered defense approach, combining SM-3s for mid-course and terminal phase interception with SM-6s for late terminal engagement, creates multiple opportunities to defeat even sophisticated maneuvering warheads. Perhaps most significantly, this deployment showcases a capability China currently cannot match: true network-centric warfare. While the PLA has invested heavily in individual platform capabilities, from advanced fighters to sophisticated missiles, it has struggled to achieve the level of real-time data integration that American forces now demonstrate routinely. The ability to have a submarine provide targeting data to a surface ship launching missiles guided by an aircraft represents decades of investment in secure communications, sensor fusion, and combat system integration. China is working towards similar capabilities, but credible estimates suggest they remain 5 to 10 years behind in operational implementation. The strategic implications extend far beyond the immediate military balance. This deployment sends unmistakable signals to regional allies and partners. For Taiwan, it demonstrates American willingness to place valuable military assets within range of Chinese weapons during a period of heightened tension. For Japan, the Philippines, and Australia, all of which have deepened security cooperation with the United States in recent years, it validates the logic of alignment with Washington. For Vietnam, Indonesia, and Malaysia, countries that have sought to balance between the great powers, it complicates calculations by demonstrating that American military capability in the region remains formidable despite Chinese advances. The economic dimensions are equally significant. Approximately 80% of Chinese oil imports transit the South China Sea, primarily through the Strait of Malacca. While no one seriously suggests the United States would interdict commercial shipping during peacetime, the demonstrated ability to control these waters in a conflict scenario represents profound leverage. Chinese strategists have long recognized this vulnerability, which partly explains the massive investment in the Belt and Road Initiative's overland corridors and the development of strategic petroleum reserves. But those alternatives remain incomplete, and the implicit American ability to threaten Chinese energy security during any Taiwan contingency shapes Beijing's risk calculations. At this point, we need to acknowledge important limitations and alternative perspectives on this deployment. First, a single carrier strike group, however capable, does not fundamentally alter the military balance in a region where China can bring to bear thousands of aircraft, hundreds of ships, and an estimated 2,000 medium-range ballistic missiles. The deployment represents a signal of intent and capability, not a decisive shift in the correlation of forces. In any sustained conflict, geographic proximity still favors China, and American ships operating within range of Chinese missiles accept significant risk regardless of their defensive capabilities. Second, some analysts argue that deployments like this risk provoking exactly the escalation they aim to deter. The security dilemma dynamic means that as one side enhances its capabilities, the other responds in kind, leading to arms race dynamics that leave both sides less secure. Chinese responses to this deployment, which reportedly include accelerated production of hypersonic weapons and expanded artificial island fortification, could ultimately produce a more dangerous regional environment. Third, the effectiveness of networked air defense systems in actual combat against peer adversaries remains unproven. The last time American naval vessels faced massed anti-ship missile attacks was during the 1987 tanker war in the Persian Gulf, and the threat environment has transformed dramatically since then. Russian and Chinese investment in electronic warfare, including capabilities designed specifically to disrupt American data links, creates uncertainty about whether these networked systems will perform as designed under actual combat conditions. Finally, we should note that the narrative of Chinese panic may be overstated. Beijing has multiple tools for responding to American military deployments, from diplomatic pressure to economic leverage to its own military demonstrations. The restrained initial response might indicate not panic, but calculated patience, allowing time to develop counter-narratives while avoiding incidents that might benefit American hawks. Chinese strategic culture emphasizes long time horizons, and PLA planners may assess that time ultimately favors their position, regardless of any single American deployment. So where does this leave us? What conclusions can we draw from this deployment and its aftermath? The United States has demonstrated both the capability and the will to operate powerful, highly integrated naval forces in waters China considers strategically vital. This deployment represents years of investment in networked warfare capabilities coming to operational fruition, challenging the assumption that China has achieved local military superiority through its anti-access strategy. Beijing's response, characterized by inconsistent messaging and notable operational restraint, suggests genuine uncertainty about how to counter this American capability. But demonstrations of capability, however impressive, are not the same as strategic victory. The underlying tensions driving great power competition in the Indo-Pacific remain unresolved. Taiwan's status, territorial disputes in the South China Sea, the trajectory of Chinese power, and the sustainability of American commitment to regional security all represent questions that military deployments can influence but not answer. What we can say with confidence is that the assumption, popular in some circles, that American military power has been eclipsed in the Western Pacific requires serious revision. The gap between American and Chinese capabilities is narrower than it was 2 decades ago, but it remains significant, particularly in the domain of networked warfare and integrated operations. This deployment makes that reality visible in ways that diplomatic statements and defense white papers cannot. Looking forward, several developments warrant close attention. Will China accelerate its own network-centric warfare development in response? How will regional states recalibrate their security relationships based on this demonstration of American capability? Will domestic political pressures in either country push toward escalation or accommodation? We'll be tracking all of these questions in upcoming analyses. If you found this examination useful, subscribe to States News and enable notifications so you don't miss our coverage as this situation develops. The strategic competition between the United States and China will be the defining geopolitical story of the next several decades, and understanding the military dimensions of that competition requires exactly the kind of detailed, nuanced analysis we provide. Until next time, thank you for watching, and remember, in great power competition, the details matter.